Okay, so hi everyone. Right now I'm gonna explain a little bit about how we can do some scattering in Solaris. So, what is Solaris? Solaris is the workspace that Houdini has for lighting and layout. So if you haven't played around with Solaris, I would recommend you to first do that and then come back to this. I'm gonna focus mainly on techniques of scattering, like very basic and simple techniques. So here is an example of what you can achieve using Solaris. This is a very simple example, but you can always escalate it and try to do something a little bit more complex, right? So here, as you can see, I have a very simple setup. I'm gonna turn off my render engine, my render. Here I have a very basic scene, which is just I'm setting up the scene here with a camera. Here I'm inserting the environment. You can see here. This is where I'm combining everything into the scene. Here's the human reference. Here's the ground geometry, which we're going to be using for the scattering. This is something that I did model really quick. It's just some really basic grid with UVs, and I just added some noise to make it a little bit more interesting, right? Nothing too crazy, so I don't want to focus too much on that. So what's going to be interesting is checking here, which is going to be the scatter, all the scattered elements, which is what I'm gonna look into, and just have here some lights, which are used to light my scene, right? So this is referencing to, here you can see my instancer. Here is the instancer that I used for this scattering, which is pretty simple, but we don't need to overcomplicate things when we are learning, right? So it's pretty simple. But before I get into the scattering, I want to explain a few things. So good practices when you are working on when you are doing some scattering. What you want to do is you want to work with what's called a component. So what's a component? A component is exactly that, a component from a scene, right? Normally it's an object. It's kind of like a unit of what a scene is, right? So you will have groups, and that group will have components, which are, for example, objects, and then you have subcomponents, which are like elements that are kind of like children of those components, right? But for now, I'm just gonna focus on the components, right? You can actually do scatter with whichever element that you want, but just for good practice, I'm gonna be using components. So here is a quick example of how you can create your own components. So if you see here, this is, if I put my random flag here, you can see that this is a component builder. So for example, if you press tab and just write component builder, you will see that it's gonna create for you these nodes, right? So you will have on this in the first node, you will place here your geometry, and it's gonna set for you the render geometry, the proxy geometry, and the proxy sim geometry. Also, it's gonna you can put here your material, and then you can assign it here, and this is gonna output your component. So here's I did really quick an example with a Robert Troy, where I just like modified the Robert Troy, but you don't have to do it. It's just so you know how you can work with components. Take your time researching how you can make your own components, or if you don't have components, do not worry about that. You can just use whatever asset that you bring over to Solaris. But here, as an example, so you can see that this works, I just plugged in an instancer right away. I'm gonna create here another instancer node, and I'm gonna plug it in so you can see that how it works. So you see that it doesn't work right away because first two things, you don't have here it's looking for an internal sub network. So if you go inside the node, you will see that there's nothing. So I'm just gonna create a grid real quick, and then it's going to be using those points now. So you see right away it just scattered those points, right? As I mentioned, right now it's grabbing the first object because right now we just have one object. It's gonna pick it up right away. As mentioned, I would rather you to use the component. So instead I'm gonna delete that and I'm gonna put here all components, and you see that it's gonna work. Or in case, let's say that you have like multiple assets listed here, but you just want to grab a specific one, you can just like copy the path and paste it here, and it's gonna do the same thing for you. So there are many multiple ways, but I'm just gonna stick for this tutorial to using the all components, so it grabs for me just the components. Well, now I'm gonna move forward to using some assets that I've created on the past. So this is going to be the grass that I'm gonna be using. And these are some rocks that I imported. So something really important that you want to make sure when you're scattering is that you have your naming very organized. For example, here I have my grass 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 variations, so 4 variations of grass, and a few more of rocks. So you can merge them together. You can have as many objects here as long as all of them have a primitive path that you can reference, and you make sure that these assets work and rendered. You should be able to use them in the instancer. So right now I'm gonna check a very basic instancer. So here you can see I'm gonna create a new one here on the side. So a new fresh one, instancer. So if I plug it on the second one right away, you will see that it's not gonna work because there's nothing inside. So I'm gonna create again a grid. Now I have, as you can see, some randomized objects, but it's not grabbing the grass. Seems like it's not grabbing as much assets as I would like to, right? So I'm gonna put here, I'm gonna say I want you to grab all my components. So I'm gonna remove this part, and you can see now it's grabbing some grass. Yeah. So it's gonna take all my assets. Right now it's set to random, and you can change the seed as you wish. But this is you don't have that much control just with that, right? So there's another options that you can have. For example, if you have index, you will be able to select which of the inputs you want to scatter, but it's just going to be the same all over the points, right? You rarely will want to do that. So I think the one that you will be using, maybe it's a index attribute. So for example, if there is each point is going to look for the attributes of the points that are inside, and it's going to use that attribute to choose which object is going to be scattered, which is also not very common, but you can do that. Or by path attribute, just another attribute, or you could use name. Right now we're going to be using name for the next example. For now I'm just going to leave this to random. And now we got to the point where we're going to look into the more complex or the real world example, right? So here, let's look at what it's inside this this scatter node. Oh, sorry, forgot to mention. If we go outside, you can see that I'm gonna set this to as a point instancer. It's important that you use a point instancer. Why to use a point instancer? It's because pretty much each point is just a reference in memory, so reference of this object. So you just save a little bit of information rather than having a copy of the original object, which takes way more memory. So that's more optimal. Here I have my kind, set this to kind component for my prototypes, and here I have name attribute, and I'm gonna set it to name just because it's more straightforward and clear, right? So I'm going inside of this node. Before explaining this, something that I like doing is I like having this loop import node. What this is going to do is going to allow me to visualize what I'm doing when I scatter things. For example, I'm gonna put here my template flag, and as you can see, you will see that you're able to see what is happening, what you're scattering, right? So just how an example of how you can set that, I'm just gonna create a loop import. So this fresh loop import you're gonna reference. I'm gonna go one level up. I'm gonna copy the instancer and I'm gonna paste here the loop path, and then I'm gonna primitives. I'm just gonna say I want to reference everything, and I think proxy should be fine, but you can reference the render geometry or whatever. So if I, as you can see, you will be able to see what is being scattered, right? This is very important when you're doing modifications, so because normally by default you will just see the points unless you go out, and you don't want to go out and in every single time you want to check how your scatter is looking. So I like having this just for visualization purposes, but feel free to do as you wish. I'm gonna keep this one. So now let's get started. Here I'm referencing my geometry with an object merge. So for this is I'm gonna turn off this for a second. I have here my object merge, and I'm bringing over my create geometry, which we're going to be using for scatter. And then I'm scattering here just right away some points. I'm scattering 100 points, and one way you can set up the which asset you want to scatter is by using the name. Do you remember? So I told you that it's important that you keep in mind the names here. For example, you can see that I have small rocks A, small rocks A2, or wild grass, and etc. Right? So if I name one of these points a certain name, it's going to be whatever object I assign the name to the point. That's the point, the asset that is going to assign to that point. Sorry if it got confusing, but what I mean by that is here I'm assigning to, I'm gonna create a new one so you can see what's going on. So if I say a name node, and I'm gonna copy just this name, loop, to all the points. That what's gonna do is it's gonna assign that name to all the points. So I'm gonna see what's scattering. So you see that I'm gonna get rocks on all the points, that specific rock. Now I'm gonna create another one, name, and you will see that now I'm gonna copy this name, paste it here, and I just want to assign that specific grass to only specific points. I'm gonna just I'm gonna select this point again, select certain points and enter. So as you can see, now I have renamed those points. So now those points is gonna have different objects scattered. The weird thing is that now the rocks disappear for some reason. Oh, my bad. It's because the one is set to primitive and I set to points. Now you can see that I have my rocks and all of them here in the first one, and then I'm overriding the name on the other one. So that's how you can have control over, like, manually on which points you can scatter certain assets and so on. So that's the first way you can scatter things, which is not very complicated or complex, but I wouldn't say it's ideal. And then here's where things start to get a little bit more interesting. When you use the attribute randomizes, you normally don't have just two assets. You don't want to be manually picking which one, right? You want it to be random, you want them to feel natural, right? So here I have an example where I am creating randomized name attributes between those two values that I gave it. So as you can see here, I have here, I'm gonna create a new one so you can see how I did it. I'm gonna create attribute randomize, So here you can see I'm gonna create here, I want to create a name attribute, which is going to be a random attribute, right? I'm just copying what I did before. I'm gonna set it here, so I want to have custom discrete here. Now I can set here manually, as you can see, the value of each one of the elements. Right now I don't have as much, I just have 2. So here I can set and just so you can see that I'm not lying, I'm just gonna set it like this, gonna copy it over. You can see that now I have two of those elements, right? And you can control the weight of these 2 elements. So for example, let's say that I want to have more of these assets, less of these assets, more grass. So you can just lower the weights of that input or increase the weight of this other one. That will allow you to have more control of how much you want to do it. It's not as tedious as selecting points manually, right? Okay, for my next example, I'm gonna turn off the preview and I'm gonna go here to the mask. As you can see in this one, I have mask drawn, and that's gonna drive the intensity of my scatter. So just so you can see how I did it, I just created an attribute paint, paint node. So you can see if it's fresh new, it's gonna be completely black, and you can change the size of your brush by scrolling. I don't want to give too much detail, but that's how you can paint your mask. And here you can define what's the name of the mask that you want to give it. So for now, I'm just gonna keep it simple. It's gonna be called mask, pretty straightforward. This is the mask that I drew. And here in my scatter node that follows the attribute paint, I just set this by density and I set it to mask because that's the name of the attribute that I selected, right? So if I see here, you will see that that mask attribute is driving the intensity, density of my mask, my scatter. And given that I have a little bit more control over where I want my points to be, and after that I can add again my attribute randomize points, and here with the same exact same node. And as you can see here, now I'm starting to get a little bit more randomization. Still not perfect, but it's getting there. Now, next example is starting to get a little bit more interesting. So here I'm gonna start to move a little bit faster. Here I'm doing the same thing. I have my mask that I draw, and then I have an attribute noise, which is gonna start to make things a little bit more interesting. So currently it might not look sorry, I'm gonna put my flag here. I don't see it because it's by default you cannot see those attributes, but if I click here in the icon, you will be able to see that mask attribute. So you can see that that is going to create a little bit more interesting patches. I'm creating this attribute noise, which is I'm setting to be mask, and I'm just multiplying it. You can set you can do so many things with masks. Right now I'm just making it a multiply, so I have these really nice patches, some irregular noise on top of what I already drew. So I have this, and then I'm gonna do the same thing. I have my scatter on top of that, and then I added my name, randomized my attribute randomize node with the name attribute on it, and then here is where things are gonna start to get a little bit more interesting. I'm gonna turn on my preview node here. So now our scatter is almost there, right? But now it comes something that is gonna give too much more life to our scatter, which is going to be randomization, like in scale and orientation, right? So for that I added these nodes. Here is the orient node, which is gonna do that. It's gonna, as you can see, it's gonna give a little bit more randomness. If I turn it on and off, you can see that it already looks a little bit more natural, right? Explaining a little bit what's the orient node, orient attribute. Orient attribute, it's not like XYZ. This is what is called a quaternion attribute, which has 4 values. It's not XYZ, it's XYZ and another 4th value, which it's a little bit complicated to explain, but just so you know, I'm gonna create here a new attribute randomize. I'm gonna show you how you can use it. I'm gonna make one fresh new. So here I'm gonna set this to orient. So by default you'll see that this is not gonna work. This is like nothing is happening. That's because I mentioned that it's kind of like a 4-dimension attribute. So here in dimensions, I'm gonna set it to 4. As you can see right away, it works, right? So orientation works differently from rotation. It goes from, value goes from -1 to 1 or 0 to 1, right? So you might want to play with that. It's not like the rotation that does like a 360 degrees. So if I do this, I'll probably don't want to have too much rotation. I'm gonna set this to 0 because this default. Sorry, I went too far. So this defines the minimum and maximum value of my attributes, right? So this is the 4th value. I think it's the intensity, or the how much is the strength of the attribute. But these three are the ones that are important for us, right? So this is X, Y, and Z. X, Y, and Z will work similar to how the rotation will work. So on Y, I would like to mainly have variation in my y-axis, so I will set this to 1, and as you can see I already have variation on my y rotation, right? I might want to have maybe a little bit of variation on my x and z, so I'm gonna set to 0.1 and 0.1 here, and I also wanted to have that variation on negative, so I'm gonna set this to -0.1 and also this one here. So as you can see, now it feels way more natural. This is the before and the after, right? So this is what I have here, so I'm just gonna keep the original one, and and I'm gonna move forward to the scale. Pscale, it's pretty simple. It's pretty much like an uniform scale for the entire object. So if you this one, it's a one dimension attribute. So it's just you can set the minimum, the maximum, and it's called pscale. And now there is this other way which you can scale, which I would not recommend to use it unless you have like a very specific way which you can want to scale your things, which is scale. This one. Now, why I wouldn't recommend to use this one is because when you are normally when you're scattering things like assets that you did, is you normally made them to have like certain proportions that are natural or that work in the real world, right? But the thing is, I'm gonna just make this a little bit more exaggerated so you can see the issue. I'm gonna set this the minimum value. I'm gonna set it lower. If I do that, you will see that there's some objects that are gonna get really flat. Maybe, yeah, this one, it's ended up almost as a piece of paper. So I would stick to pscale unless you want something very specific. Then you definitely can use the scale randomization. Maybe it'll be useful for trees, which I would recommend. For example, let's say that you want like different size of trees, and then you can just randomize certain axes, but it might look weird, so use it with caution. And now we're moving to the last example, which is how I would do this scatter, which is this is the result of the scatter that I did. So here, for starters, I normally would like to have different set of points for different type of objects. For example, here on my left, this stream is the one that I'm using to scatter my grass. Here on the right, I'm using one for scattering my rocks, right? So here I'm painting the grass mask, and then and then I'm just using my mask to give a little bit of variation, as I mentioned before, doing some scattering, nothing too crazy. Here I'm setting the randomized, the randomness, as I mentioned before, but now I'm adding a little bit more assets, right? Before I just had 2 different assets, now I added more to make it a little bit more interesting. Here I added the randomization orient, the pscale, and that is what gave me I'm gonna turn the visualization. Now I have my grass, right? And here I'm gonna check the other side. So have my mask, I added this net and the extra noise on the mask. I have my scatter on top of that, and then add the the noise, add the name attribute, and then the orient, and then the pscale. There you go. You ended up with a really nice scatter. Now, a little bit of a small tip when you are doing some organic scattering, something to keep in mind. As you can see here, in the pscale, I did something a little bit more interesting. Normally in nature, there is this tendency of in general in the world, the objects are not linear, right? Nothing is linear. Like it's like scale 0 and scale 1. This doesn't happen in nature. You will normally get something similar to this, right? So this is why you have also some control over your custom ramp. I'm just gonna create a new one. I don't remember how was it. Attribute randomize. So here, set to continue. So I'm gonna set this to pscale. You can see I have from 0 to 1, right? But you just have uniform value, but that's not how the world works. So I would like to use a custom ramp. That way you can have control over how many points on what value you have. So I'm gonna set this, for example, this to maybe 0.3, maybe this to 0.5, but I'm gonna set this one way more to this side, and then I'm gonna have only a few that are very tall, like 5, well, maybe not 5, 3 or 2. So I know this is exaggerated, but you can go from there and play around with the scale, and you can see this starts looking a little bit more natural than if you just did a constant value, which is not constant, a uniform, which is pretty linear, pretty flat, and pretty boring. So yeah, the more variation that you give to nature is the more natural it's gonna look like, and that's how you end up with the result that we did. So that was it, and you ended up with this render. Hope you like it. If you would like to learn about something else, let me know. I will be happy to explain it. And yeah, thank you for watching.
So catch me if I fall.